it seems that the economy is responding to the sharpest increase in energy prices for a generation in a fairly resilient manner.
There is a huge element that is going to affect the competitiveness of Latin America, also to supply the rest of the world in terms of food. I agree with Julian. I don't think Latin America is going to have a problem of shortage of food, but in order to export, there is going to an impact. And also the inflationary problems that are going to come.
The price of production will go up because of fertilizers becoming more scarce or more difficult to obtain since there's disruption in the supply chain. That will just increase the input cost of all the producing countries, and then the question is whether they are able to pass this cost on to consumers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast of Sustainable LatAm. I'm here with Alberto, who, like me, is a journalist trying to understand what's going on, and with Julian, who's an economic analyst who's also trying to understand what's going on. And our big subject today is the response of the Latin American agroindustrial sector to the crisis posed by the conflict in the Middle East and the war in Iran. So what we'll be looking at is how does this change things for Latin America? Are there opportunities? Are there threats? What's the way forward? And having introduced that, I really wondered whether Alberto or Julian would like to start off saying how you see the issue.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Julian. First of all, thank you for telling me the Alberto, not just Alberto. So that's a good
The
thing.
special Alberto.
Special Alberto. But no, in a more serious thing, definitely the war on Iran is going to have and it's having an impact on the agro industry and especially in the export area in Latin America. But from what I read and by seeing all the reports coming from Bloomberg, El País, Financial Times, but as well organizations like the World Bank or the IMF, this impact is not a direct impact, it's an indirect impact. And it's clear to see when you see certain graphics are around, and I can see here, the biggest impact has been obviously in what is called the insumes for the agro industry, fertilizers, crude oil, Brent crude oil, and natural gas, which is affecting mostly Europe rather than Latin America. The most impact is in fertilizers for the agro industry and also Brent and crude oil, because those are insumes for the productions of soybean production, corn production, and all other agribusiness, where Brazil and Argentina are big powers, big gamers, big players in this game. But if we look at Brazil, the closure of the Hormuz Strait has a direct impact in fertilizers, and Brazil imports around 43% of its imports of fertilizers coming through the Hormuz Strait. So that's an impact in that. And from what we can see is that is going to have an impact in the short terms, more cost for the production. And in the medium and long term, it's affecting competitiveness for the agro industry in Latin America because everything is going to be more expensive. Prices are going up for production, and obviously we have to see if the producers can keep the same level of production or is going to reduce because the costs are going up. That's what I'm seeing in general, especially when you're seeing the latest report of the World Bank regarding it's called, I will tell you immediately the name. It's a commodity market outlook in April 2026 has been showing that, and especially the cost in the insults has been incredibly high. It's not the same when we're talking about in terms of the prices of food. There is an increase, but compared to the war in Ukraine, this has been a lesser impact when we're seeing the graphics. I don't know, Julian, what is your view on that?
On the impact, it's bad.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty bad for everyone. So actually, we can look at the there are some gains of course, for the energy producing countries. So, Venezuela is if it's restarts, it should be a winner of this. To some extent, Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, Argentina should be also an exporter of, should get some gains on the prices. But for the rest, for those who import energy and oil in particular, it's pain. And here we look in particular at Chile and Peru. So, which is an interesting one because you have recent elections in those countries. So those are going to be, facing issues in terms of transportation, electricity generation, logistics, and general inflation across everything. What will happen there is that, well, and people are already sensing that is that when you have inflation and real assets tend to go up, and that generally means property, but existing properties, because construction will be impacted with the cost of inflation. So fuel, food inflation, probably some depreciation in currency, possibly higher interest rates. Just this may lead to social unrest everywhere. We currently see it to some extent in Bolivia with bloqueos everywhere. So these are some of the impact for the agriculture. There are two sides of it. One is the price of production will go up because of fertilizers becoming more scarce, or more difficult to obtain, since there's disruption in the supply chain. That will just increase the input cost of all the producing countries. And then the question is whether they are able to pass this cost on to consumers. And here I think I would imagine that actually they are. China is still a massive importer of a lot of produce from Latin America. Europe is just going through exactly the same economic shock, with inflation, just around the corner on all foods. And certainly Brazil and other LatAm countries, Argentina, have a lot to offer there. The Mercosur agreement just came into action 10, 12 days ago. And that's actually a very very timely agreement to come alive for the EU, and but also for the producers and for the buyers in Europe. So actually,
can I jump in?
Yeah.
Sorry, Julian. In a way, I'm just kind of going over what you've just been saying. I see the situation as two question marks: a big macroeconomic global question mark, and then a slightly smaller one, which is the impact in Latin America. And one of the things that strikes me is how resilient the global economy seems to have been so far, in the sense that we are not looking at immediate shortages in the shops or immediate high-profile disruption, it seems that the economy is responding to the sharpest increase in energy prices for a generation in a fairly resilient manner. If you look at things like the Financial Times, various newspapers of that type, they are quoting people saying, well, the first shortages should appear by the end of May, beginning of June. So that, if you like, is my big question mark. And the smaller question mark is how does it impact specifically on Latin American countries, which is what you've been giving us. Forgive me for having interrupted you.
No, absolutely.
But the sort of the question I suppose I wondered if you could address is, do you think there will be shortages in Latin America because obviously they're politically the most sensitive at this time, particularly in the countries with elections?
So I don't think so. For me, shortages is Latin America is rich in resources, natural resources, in all kinds of resources. So it's not the big risk here is food shortages, as you just mentioned yourself. But Latin America shouldn't. It's not. Uh, it's not a place where you should have food shortages. You can literally go down outside of cities and find plenty of food just right at your doorstep. And the people are resilient enough, and they can just very quickly change and reorganize themselves. Resilience. I was at an event with lots of Latin American people recently, and everyone joked about how resilient everyone is to operate in those countries. And it's true, you just need to reorganize yourself and refunction. So food is not so much of an issue. The issue will be inflationary, and jobs will be costs of living. And that will filter through. And I think yes, most of the reports do say that from June onwards is when you are likely to see shortages, possibly in Europe. You probably have it already across the Asian countries, into some African countries as well. So, these shortages which are happening. We hear in Western Europe, we hear about canceling flights because of fuel shortages already. So it is happening. There's but it's the reorganization of how things happen. And we'll come back. We discussed this previously about as soon as the Iran war started, and we said, well, who are the winners here of this conflict? And I remain of the view that the US is for them this is a US induced conflict, and the US remains a really strong position. It's still growing at 3.5%. It's an energy net producer. It will export. I think the President Trump showed or tweeted or whatever the term is recently, not too long ago, this image of all the tankers going to the US to get energy there. So the US will supply to some extent the world with the people that can afford it with the energy. But there, I think this is where the impact for Latin American countries specifically is an interesting one, because those that can supply energy to the rest will actually get income out of it, but the others are going to be suffering quite a bit at oil price of over 100, or it starts becoming quite significant. We've heard recently that I think the UAE is coming out of OPEC, or is one of the Middle Eastern countries. I can't remember. Is literally saying that's it. So you have a changing order here, and then on the other side is you have Russia, who's still out there, who has been propped up economically to some extent by the energy prices rising, but is also massive, huge exporters of fertilizers. And so you have all these, underlying geopolitical events that has been caused, but actually here again, the winners for Russia, it's a huge, this conflict is actually really positive. And so the question here is to what extent do they, again, does the US need to, are they impacted over the period of time? So as soon as it starts filtering to its economy, it may, this is when things may change, and we do have midterms coming up, and at some stage, they may decide, okay, well, that's it, we'll leave it as it is, and we know that they are pretty ruthless, as we've seen, in Venezuela. They've taken out the head of state, and then accommodated themselves with whoever was there next. And we can think that they will take a similar ruthless approach to other countries completely, and so some negotiations ongoing, and we'll see where that lands. But there is the winners again we can see it in the so in economic stuff, we can see it in the market. So I was looking yesterday trying to find the sovereign yield spreads of Latin American countries, which is basically an indication of if of confidence in lending to these countries. And really there's a general say that if it goes through time, so the short period, and then it goes to 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years, depending on how much on the duration of your lending. And there's a general say that if at some stage your curve inverts the further you go, so further in the future, then that's implies a low growth or a recession. Now, interestingly enough, when I was looking into this yesterday, Chile's yield curve is actually looking pretty is actually going down. So that signifies that that's a signal that the market sees a lot of risk here, and so Chile should be really thinking about, okay, it's being fully impacted by everything. Brazil to some extent is also going down. Colombia is going down. Mexico is more or less flat, and Peru has started to alter. So you can see a movement of actually the yield started to invert for all of these countries to some extent, and for me that's really that's really symptomatic of it. It says a lot about the unpreparation of and the potential unrest that you are going to face, especially for these new governments. That people are going to go, well, we voted for you, and now we have no food, nothing. So to some extent, I guess, thankfully, they have some years to go through, but I say, well, they can be given the benefit of the doubt, or they would say that it's actually because of the previous government that we are in such a situation. But this will cause some instability in some of these countries, and then we'll have to look into the to what extent is an external help can happen. To what extent is it beneficiary for the US to dominate the subcontinent? Is it of interest for governments or for countries to be in instability, or can they pick and choose who they can support, in the same way that we saw Argentina more recently, who was given a line of credit by the US.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see more of these factors right now. So I think there are many things. There's a micro impact. There's an impact to the population. There's an impact to the countries in itself. But we always have to think right at the top. And I go back to the initial discussion that we always have about is it a complete folly to go into a war that no one understands and you don't know when you get out or whatever, or is it actually something that has been planned all the way, and so that by people, it's not just a president, by people around him, and the entire part of the administration apparatus to reset the dial, which is actually one of his, right at the beginning was one of his objectives of for government. And we understand, there was, I think I listened recently to Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, saying that he was given the green light to effectively wage economic war on Iran, on Iran, and therefore, that meant weaponizing the dollar, using sanctions. I think he mentioned that a bank went bankrupt. Then you had the pushback by China more recently, who announced that they would sanction any companies in China that abided by the sanction given by the US, more or less, which basically puts a lot of people in conflict, especially if you are not a US or Chinese company. If you are a European company, you need to abide now by three rules. One, who do you fear most? The US sanction, the Chinese sanction, retaliation, or the European laws. So of course you're going to be binded by the EU laws because that's what you are. But to a massive extent, you got to be careful about the potential penalties that arises from going against the US sanctions. But at the same time, by doing this, you may be committing a problem with China, who may sanction you. Now they've explicitly said that they may do so. It's mostly for their companies, but it's a message for all the others. We are now they are started to exert uh, power from the outside, and that has implication, of course, for Latin American
Yeah.
countries who trade a lot with Chinese, and at the same time trade to some extent with the US, and are under from what we see, the general movement of the US, trying to ascertain its power across Latin American countries.
And in
In
some
fact,
ways, oh, sorry, Alberto, go ahead.
sorry, Andrew. Yeah. No, it's really interesting all what we're seeing because yes, I agree. There is a full line of implications on all of this, and the situation is bad for Latin America. Eh, eh, if you are in the middle of this competition between China and the US and all what is going on, and the war in Iran also has direct, as I said, some indirect effects on what is the competitiveness of the agro industry in Latin America. You were saying right, Julian, and I totally agree. Oil producers, net oil producers like Brazil and Argentina can be happy about the oil, but their agribusiness is huge. It's very big as well, and it's being impacted. So it's like a double impact. And also from what you're saying about Chile and Colombia, I was reading recently uh, one of the biggest impact on countries like Chile and Colombia, which are not big producers. In the case of Colombia, they can sustain their own oil production, but there is also pressure on these countries at the inflationary level, but also at the rate exchange. There is going to be devaluation. Their notes are losing value, and that's an impact as well inside the population. So we can see a lot of disrupting elements going around that. I just want to read something that comes from AgroLatam, which is an publication that focuses on agroindustry in Latin America, and says that one of the impacts that can be seen at this moment of the war in Iran is first, diesel price hikes driving up agricultural operating costs, one effect. Surging international freight rates due to disruption in Hormuz and the Red Sea. So, second effect. Logistical delays affecting grains, oilseeds, and fertilizers, which we already talked, is another effect. Fuel shortage in productive areas, which is coming as well, and increased packaging costs due to rising petrochemical naphtha prices. So there is a huge element that is going to affect the competitiveness of Latin America, also to supply the rest of the world in terms of food. I agree with Julian. I don't think Latin America is going to have a problem of shortage of food, but in order to export, there is going to an impact. and also the inflationary problems that are going to come. We recently were talking, if you remember, Andrew, how Argentina was surprised with high inflation that is impacting the government of Milei. In a way, it's not good news for Argentina, and this is happening also in Chile.
Yeah.
We are seeing in Bolivia there are massive protests. There are a lot of political reasons behind there, but it has to do also with the impact of the war in Iran and the energy crisis that is impacting in Bolivia as well. It's a small country, so we can see a huge domino effect on that.
I'd like to jump in with two things.
Yeah.
One is just to pick up on what Julian was saying, that world trade and geopolitics has become increasingly complicated, and how do you reconcile, the interests of different superpowers, your own laws, and it just strikes me that on that subject, that this is a central issue for the next decade probably, which is, in my mind, any rational Latin American government would want to get the best deal it can out of the United States and the best deal it can out of China, and in some ways walk a sort of tightrope between those two things in pursuit of the national interest. So I think we may be seeing this spread from very specific areas, automobiles, very specific industrial sectors, and go much more widely. And the question is, if you are a recently elected Latin American president, how do you craft your diplomatic stance in relation to the United States and to China, and how do in turn China and the United States play their cards? So I think we're going to be talking about this sort of thing for quite a lot of time in the future. My second point is really, I've sort of uh, claimed to Alberto that I'll bring some interesting statistic to each of our podcasts that's worth reflecting on. And my interesting statistic that I've found from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is that Latin America is responsible for 19% of world food production, um, whereas it is responsible for only 8% of world food consumption. In other words, perhaps uniquely among the major regions of the world, Latin America is a very important food exporter, um, and not likely to be hurt immediately by shortages of food, as we're all saying. Although there is real poverty in Latin America, and there are issues to do with food security and food cost. They, if you like, require adjustments to domestic politics rather than any kind of change in the global position. But my question to both of you really is, since Latin America is such an important food producer, do you see circumstances in which the current crisis comes good for particular Latin American countries? And again, Julian's already sort of explained part of this to us by looking at the costs that different countries face. But do you think it can leverage that 19% share of world food output uh, to its own benefit?
I can jump with two things in this because that's really interesting. And I agree, 19% is a net exporter. As I mentioned before, the biggest risk for agri-foods exporters in Latin America is going to be competitiveness because the cost of production is going to go up because the insumes like fertilizers and all is going to go up. But that doesn't mean that all is going to be bad. Brazil is a power in terms of agriculture, and they are going to try to in a way balance that this this element. And on the other side, Brazil has the huge benefit of huge oil prices going around. So I think we're going to see probably that Latin America is going to try to keep this level of production, although it's going to be a level of impact because everything is going to cost more. There's another element that we have to put in the game in terms of risk, and I see this in this report of the World Bank that I was talking about commodity prices. One of the risks that has been seen for 2026 is the possible coming of a climate phenomena like El Nino that has always an impact on agriculture. So if you combine the impact of the war on Iran on fertilizers and all what helps the production of agro-industry in Latin America, plus phenomena like El Nino and La Nina, we can see that there is going to be pressure on exporters of agriculture in Latin America. Competitiveness is going to be a pressure on that, and probably the governments are going to need to answer to this kind of demands. On the other side, at world level, what we're going to see is an increased demand of food as well, because we are seeing that the price of food in Latin America is not going as up, and in general in the world, but it's going up. And some other countries like Asia, even in Europe, there is going to be more demand of these prices are going to up. And Latin America is one of the biggest exporters, so probably it's going to try to find some responses through this that could benefit this industry. But from my point of view, it's a mixed effect. I think there are big risks in terms of competitiveness for this industry. And there's also the geopolitical element that is impacted in the region. Most of the agriculture exports of Latin America, especially Brazil, where is it going? Normally it's China, and we are seeing this kind of competition. We have to see how Brazil or Argentina and other countries are going to play in the geopolitical world with these elements.
I think there's an interesting angle, additional angle, which is artificial intelligence and its use in agriculture. I mean, because what we're really saying is that to hold its own, Latin America needs to be more competitive in agricultural production, and artificial intelligence and various other technological innovations holds out the possibility of that happening, of the crops like soya or wheat being produced in increasingly cost-effective ways. One example is that in the past, if you had a field where you needed to attack some weeds, you would spray the whole thing with pesticides. Nowadays, you can send out drones who will tell you that the entire field, a lot of the field is clear of weeds. It's only in the northeast corner that there's a problem. So technology can allow you to address that problem more directly, reduce the use of harmful pesticides, and simultaneously increase yields. So that's potentially an opportunity for Latin America to help it get its way through the current crisis. The cost.
I think that's a really good point going with artificial intelligence, but that shows me I'm going to sound a little bit political, a lefty political, but it's also shown me a structural problem in Latin America, which is going to be dependence. Unfortunately, Latin America can use artificial intelligence, but it's not producing anything on it. It's just a consumer of AI, basically. And that is going to go and depends who is the big winner in that is probably the US and the companies who are going to behind on this. And again, that's a structural problem in Latin America that can have a lot of potential in terms of commodities, but it's it's still relying externally to different levels. AI, the main exports to China, that external impact affect this industry that could be even more booming.
The cost.
I think I remain so for me if we just take if we just take the agribusiness right now, LATAM countries, those are producers are depend quite a bit on external imports, so for fertilizers. But Brazil does have a plan, apparently. Whether it's emotional is a different thing, but does have a plan to reduce that dependence from the high levels to below to around 45% or 40% and so on. So I think there's a shift there whereby such countries such as Brazil are basically saying, well, we could, they have all the resources. LatAm, so especially in South America, has all the resources it needs. And it's just a question of, well, let's utilize it to actually become to rebalance ourselves, our need from external parties, to become more insular to some extent, in the same way that the US is and China and everyone is moving. And so I think that shift to some extent may happen. And if it does happen, actually what will happen is that it will suddenly countries such as Brazil, which are possibly in my view, possibly part of the next superpowers, could be completely net energy producers, net exporters of goods and of all kinds of really necessary things, which has always been to some extent what they could do. But we are seeing this movement at this present moment that this is happening, and this war in Iran conflict is maybe an acceleration of that, of this motion that everyone needs to sort out. What do they import, or who do they depend on, and so on. And to that extent, that will just reinforce themselves. So for some of these countries in the negotiation that they have in between the various other powers, be it China or the US or well, not that it's been felt much, or the European Union as a bloc. And so therefore that could be there's a path for this to still be for LatAm to be a net beneficiary of all of this. To some extent, that will depend a lot on the US and its plans of domination. The signals are there. We looked at this article about that they were preparing their soldiers in Panama or doing training camps, and there are signals that they want to be more involved. I don't know I'm not sure what that means. There's a lot of jungle around Latin America, certainly, but does that mean even a foot on the ground? What does it actually says? But certainly for some countries, that Brazil and surely Argentina should benefit from all these things. So there's a tightrope, but it's there. I think Brazil is maneuvering pretty well, generally speaking. A lot of fertilizers comes from Russia, which is and Brazil is not unfriendly to Russia. But at the same time, it's a commodity. It has been doing some big deals with the US recently, and trades a lot with China. All of which is actually pretty good for the Brazilian economy, and the stock market has been reflecting of this to some extent, going up. One of the best performers.
And I think it's also worth saying that as the largest Latin American country, Brazil has potential economies of scale that it can seek. And for example, I'm not sure how technologically viable this is, but the Brazilians have been talking about biofertilizers. In other words, using fertilizers that do not require a large proportion of fossil fuels, which would reduce their dependence on Russia. Although that's probably not a priority, as you're saying, they have reasonably friendly relations with Russia. I think it's also worth keeping an eye on India, because the incredibly fast demographic growth in China is beginning to level off. the population is reaching a ceiling, it would seem, which is not the case in India. So Brazilian exporters who have exported many commodities to China are perhaps hoping to begin to export an increasing amount to India as well. The
Yeah,
cost.
I think absolutely. So I think all of this will depend a lot on you know, Brazil has scale behind it. Mercosur has scale
Yeah.
has scale behind it, and if they manage to actually get their act together as a bloc, that becomes a really important bloc. Um, and and so it depends to some extent who needs what. And there, this is the beauty of the things, is that the other parties need different things. So we understand that the US is needs a lot of energy. Its main focus is on AI dominance, and AI dominance needs to be fed immensely. It needs to be independent from China for rare earth minerals, and there are plenty around in the southern hemisphere, and that's good for Brazil. On the other side, for China, it still needs to feed itself. It's got 1.3, 1.4 billion, uh, and uh, and it needs to feed the entire economy to some extent, and 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 Brazil has the capacity to feed a lot of things there. From the pigs, which is one of the major consumption in China, to the population, to everything. So there's massive opportunities there. Mercosur opens up to some extent. The EU agreement opens up the EU market, which in terms of stress and to independentize itself from, I don't know if that's a word actually, to itself
We'll
from,
let you get away with it.
yeah, from Russia and the current conflict that they may have with Russia. They need to have this alliance with Brazil and the Mercosur, so that it can get what it needs, especially if there's more conflicts in the Middle East, which may happen, may flare up, and whatever is happening there is unlikely to be short term. The impact will be for longer term, from what we can see. So there's huge opportunities for the countries to come out on top and do very well, and so to some extent that's a positive. I'm going back to even for commodities. China used to be a massive commodity because of its construction. They stopped everything. It's no longer, or hasn't been for some. The government has introduced massive, huge policies to tackle this issue of over construction. It has done so. The prices have gone down 30-40%. Something which would create revolutions in other countries, and that's no longer, to some extent, the primary source of consumers. But you need copper for instance, for pipelines, for wires. If we think that we're moving towards electric grids all over the place, and electricity and electric cars and data centers, energy, and all these things, you need a huge
A
amount of
lot of
copper
copper, yeah.
to do all this. So in an AI supply chain world, the Latin American countries are very well placed as well. And in addition to the efficiency, I just remember that several years ago, Alberto and I did this study to evaluate deforestation in numerical terms versus where the whether there was a value add versus the agriculture. So when you deforested some land, you decide to grow some soya, or put some cows in. What's actually the more value if you started to evaluate land or the forests at a certain price, and we had estimated, value add and value loss here. And so I think here this is where it's interesting to come back to your point, Andrew, is where AI and robotics and all of these new technologies coming in to make the production much more efficient across the board, because certainly we saw at the time a lot of the countries were actually quite efficient in that analysis, and we had I think it was a professor from Yale commenting on Twitter at the time about what we produced. But a lot of the countries were actually pretty efficient, which means that they were doing some of the countries were standing out. So unfortunately for Alberto and I, Bolivia was clearly not not looking well there. Paraguay wasn't looking great, but Brazil was straight on the line where it was on sort of on the line between value add and value loss. It was full on point. So these gains of efficiency and AI can certainly help to will help to utilize more, but we can trust the producers to be at the forefront of this, to be intelligent, to go for this, because they know how to operate in a competitive market, and they know that this is something that will be good for them.
We're beginning to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead.
I was just going to say we're beginning to run out of time, and whether you might sum up what you think is most important. I could ask an impossible question, which I sometimes try and do. We're about the likelihood of popular protests in Latin America over food-related issues. Whether something like that will happen in the rest of 2026, or generally, if you just give us your headlines for what will happen in the future.
I will jump in and I will go. That's what I wanted to say before. I will play something that you always say, Andrew. Let's try to be a little bit pessimists in this element, but I have a mixed feeling in this element, and that's my personal view. There are opportunities. You already says AI probably they are going to go improvements in the way that we're producing. There are a lot of opportunities around, but the risks are there. Julian just says when we're talking about sovereign yields, we can expect recession, the pressures around that. I don't think in that the three of us agree. I don't think it's going to be protests because of shortage of food. I think there are going to be protests because the cost of life are going to get up. I think the main problems for Latin America at this moment in the short, medium, and long term, short term is going to be cost increase of production costs, which is affecting challenges to be more competitive in a very interconnected world. But on the other side, I think that the medium and long-term risks are going to be inflationary pressures, the geopolitical pressures. We know it's going around, but in terms of population, I think the population are going to feel more the pressure on cost of living, and governments will need in a way to try to respond to this, because that is probably the main problem coming ahead for new governments going around that. It's going to be impacts on supply chains, impact in a lot of levels that has a domino effect in the rest of the region from my point of view. So that's the kind of things that is common in Latin America. We always are used to see social protests around because of inequality and all the things. And in a context of an international war, and in a context that the situation is going to get more worse, at least in the near future, rather than get better, because of all what is happening around the world, I think there are going to be social pressure for all the governments, whether it's right, left, or it's going to be social pressures all across Latin America. And we can expect that. And probably that's the main challenge. That's how I'm seeing. We didn't mention here. We mentioned very well Argentina, Brazil, the two biggest benefits in terms of agriculture. Mexico is really interesting what is going to happen with Mexico in the near future as well, because it's the fourth producer of oil in the region, but also they have their own problems. And these three big are going to probably define what is going to go ahead then in the rest of the region. Big opportunities, definitely, but also big challenges.
Yeah. So, Julian, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think thinking about it, well, we can already see it. New governments, as we mentioned, there's already some instability in Bolivia right now, and new governments in Chile, Peru. They will face so for Chile and Peru, they are fairly open economies, and the oil impact will be big. And that will have its ramification at some stage. So I would say that we can expect further social unrest across the board, because you have also Colombia not too far away, Ecuador. So you already have polarized voters across the continent, and that will just exacerbate the polarization to some extent. But on the back of it, again, I remain to the fact that this huge opportunities, huge resources, ability to actually sell to and create value and sell to everyone. And so in the short term, the pain may be there, but actually in the long term, it's out of all the rest, in relative terms, out of all the other blocks, whether it's China, EU, Africa, or other parts of Asia, and so on, except the US, because that's a different, as we say, it's actually probably a winner here. LatAm is actually looking pretty good versus the others. So I will still be, I'm still a buyer of LatAm stuff.
That's for sure.
Just to throw in my thoughts, I think cost of living and petrol prices at the pump are going to continue being politically sensitive. They have been for decades in Latin America, and I don't see that changing too rapidly. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this discussion. And we'll come back with in 2 weeks with another debate on the future of Latin America and the social, geopolitical, and general issues involved. Thank you very much, and bye for now.